ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जायमुदीरये। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामीनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे। हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। हरे कृष्णा। रीडिंग फ्रॉम श्रीमद् भागवतम by his divine grace इसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। We are reading from Canto 4, Chapter 27, Attack by Chandavega on the city of Puranjan. So sorry for the delay in the beginning. There was some glitch in the software and class was not starting. Needless to say, we are very grateful to our team headed by Mudit Krishna Prabhu, Mataji, Tapan Prabhu, who are tirelessly working on this. We have to wait for 5 minutes, but they have to struggle for 15-20 minutes right way early in the morning to start this in time. So we are at text 4. शयान उन्नतमदो महामना महार्हतल्पे महिषी भुजोपदिः तामेव वीरो मनुते परं यतस्तमोभिभूते न निजं परं च यत्. Translation.
In this way, increasingly overwhelmed by illusion, King Puranjana, although advanced in consciousness, remained always lying down with his head on the pillow of his wife's arm. In this way, he considered woman to be his ultimate life and soul. Becoming thus overwhelmed by the mode of ignorance, he could not understand the meaning of self realization, of itself, or of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport. Human life is meant for self realization. First of all, one has to realize his own self, which is described in this verse as Nijam. Then he has to understand or realize the Supersoul or Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. However, when one becomes too much materially attached, he takes a woman to be everything. This is the basic principle of material attachment. In such a condition, one cannot realize his own self or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Srimad Bhagavatam 5.5.2, it is therefore said, Mahat Sevam Dwaram Ahu Vimukte Sa Tamo Dwaram Yoshitam Sangi Sangam. If one associates with Mahatmas or devotees, his path of liberation is opened. But if one becomes too much attached to women or to persons who are also attached to women, that is, attached to women directly or indirectly, he opens the Tamodwaram, the door to the darkest region of hellish life. King Puranjana was a great soul, highly intellectual and possessed of advanced consciousness. But due to his being too much addicted to women, his whole consciousness was covered. In the modern age, the consciousness of people is too much covered by wine, women, and flesh. Consequently, people are completely unable to make any progress in self realization. The first step of self realization is to know oneself as spirit soul, apart from the body. In the second stage of self realization, one comes to know that every soul, every individual living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Soul, Paramatma, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 15.7. ममैवांशो जीवलोके जीवभूताः सनातनः मनःषष्ठानि इन्द्रियाणि प्रकृतिस्थानि कर्षति. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. All living entities are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Unfortunately, in this present civilization, both men and women are allowed to be attracted to one another from the very beginning of life. And because of this, they are completely unable to come to the platform of self realization. They do not know that without self realization, they suffer the greatest loss in the human form of life. Thinking of a woman always within one's heart is tantamount to lying down with a woman on a valuable bedstead. The heart is the bedstead, and it is the most valuable bedstead. When a man thinks of women and money, he lies down and rests on the arms of his beloved woman or wife. In this way, he overindulges in sensual life and thus becomes unfit for self realization. Hare Krishna.
So now here, Puranjan, in this way, he was increasingly overwhelmed by illusion and always thinking of, uh, the comfort and activities of the material sense gratification. He could not understand the meaning of the self, not the Supreme Lord. So again, he is still a hero. Veer, the word used here is Viro, that is a great hero. Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that human life is meant for self-realization, right? And what is self-realization? That is what is Atma is. So therefore, the word used here is Atma, Nija. So one has to understand oneself first, and then one has to understand one's relationship with the Supreme Lord. But when one becomes materially too attached, what happens is that he will take the object of sense gratification to be everything, right? So it is a woman for a man and a man for a woman. And that is the basic principle of material attachment. This attachment has to be diverted to association of devotees. Muhat sevam ahur dwaram vimukte tamodwaram yoshitam sangi sangam. When the attach, so there is a tendency to get attached, and when this tendency to get attached is diverted to association of the devotees, and the message of in the association of the devotees, then doors of the liberation will be opened. However, if this tendency to get attached is diverted to sense gratification, it will open the doors of the hell. Right. Tamodwaram Yoshinam Sangisangam. Right. Here it is said that attached to woman or person who are attached to woman, like that it is. And for woman it is attached to man, and person who are attached to man, like that it is. Like very, you know, drastic, very tragic death yesterday in Pune. Two billionaire families, Abjadish. Abjadish means their each family property goes beyond more than 250 crore, 300 crore each. And both of them are from Market Yard, which is not very far from our temple, just 5-6 kilometers. And this boy, Agarwal family, Ketan Agarwal, and he was about to be married to this Kia Goyal. And this girl was both coming from very rich family, very samskari families as such. And this girl was in Tamodwaram Yoshitam Sangi Sangam. She was attached to her boyfriend, and that boyfriend, and they had some affair kind of a thing. And this boyfriend and this girl, and her marriage was fixed with this Ketan. They got them to Lohagad, and this girl killed him by throwing him in, just धक्का दे दिया और वो नीचे गिर गए, and he just died on the spot. So 4 days back, the news came. It was like tragic death, and now it is the investigation shows that it is actually the killing. Tamodwaram Yoshitam Sangi Sangam. Right. The doors of the hell are opened for this girl now. She is arrested. Her family is arrested, and the so-called boyfriend, that lover, is also arrested. Just imagine what a fall from a grace, right? And therefore, this sense gratification is extremely dangerous. One should never cross the boundary of sense gratification. What happens is when we cross the boundary, the result is not in our hands. Right. So one devotee was very beautifully explaining that the mistake may be small, but the result of that mistake, we have no control over the result of that mistake. Like somebody is driving, somebody may say that Prabhuji, I have driven 1 lakh kilometer. एक wrong turn ले लिया. And just imagine that wrong turn happens to be a flyover, which is like 500 feet above, and that one wrong turn breaks the parapet boundary of the highway, and the car falls 500 feet down. So, and that's why the world is also called as padam padam yat vipadam natesham. So what the point here is, Prabhupada says here that the attachment to sense gratification leads to the doors of the hellish doors are open. Bhagavad Gita talks about this. Trividham narakasya idam dwaram atmanashanah kama krodha tatha lobhas tasmadedam trayam tyaje. Trividham narakasya idam. These are the kama, krodha and lobh are extremely dangerous. Literally entire Pune is shocked by this yesterday's news that this also can happen. Boy is 26-year-old, girl is 24-year-old. The so-called lover is something like 24-year-old, and these two boys, they just destroyed this very innocent person, very innocent boy, only son. So this is disastrous, and it is especially said, "Kama turanam na bhayam na lajja." That one who is Kama turanam na bhayam na lajja. And therefore, Prabhupada will be talking about this, time after time again. And okay, I mean, another thing is what is the greatest loss? The loss of reputation, the loss in the jail, the life in the jail, that all is there only. But the greatest loss is the opportunity in the human form of life. That only a saint like Srila Prabhupada can say. The greatest loss here is, Prabhupada writes, King Puranjan was a great soul, highly intellectual, and possessed advanced consciousness, but he was too addicted to sense gratification. And because of this extreme addiction to sense gratification, he did not realize how the time is passing by. And then Srila Prabhupada describes Atma is Mamaivamsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana, is eternally fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Every Atma is like that. And therefore, he is supposed to act on the self realization, especially in the human form of life. But he is unable to do so, and therefore, so many miseries are coming to him. Thinking of sense gratification is also considered as sense gratification. Right? Prabhupada writes here. Thinking of sense gratification is also sense gratification. And therefore, one's consciousness has to be purified by Krishna consciousness. So this Goyal and this Agarwal case is very, very shocking case. This just happened yesterday, text file. Sometimes, we may feel why, sometimes I feel like that, why there is so much stress on material life, this, that. But, when a Shaktiavish avatar, empowered Acharya like Srila Prabhupada writes his books, so there is a reason for that. There is a reason to repeat all these things. Text 5. तथैव रममाणस्य कामकश्मलचेतसः क्षणार्धम् इव राजेन्द्र व्यतिक्रान्तं नवं वयः. Translation.
Translation, my dear King Prashinabhirsa, in this way, King Puranjana, with his heart full of lust and sinful reactions, began to enjoy sensual life with his wife, and in this way, his new life and youth expired in half a moment. Prabhuji, could you please read? Sri Govinda Dasa Thakura has sung.
Yeah. Edhana yavana putra parijana itike ache parati tire kamala dalajala jivana talamada bhajahu haripada nitire.
Thank you, Prabhuji. In this verse, Sri Govinda Dasa actually says that there is no bliss in the enjoyment of youthful life. In youth, a person becomes very lusty to enjoy all kinds of sense objects. The sense objects are form, taste, smell, touch, and sound. The modern scientific method or advancement of scientific civilization encourages the enjoyment of these five senses. The younger generation is very pleased to see a beautiful form, to hear radio messages of material news and sense gratificatory songs, to smell nice scents and nice flowers, and to touch the soft body or breasts of a young woman and gradually touch the sensual organs. All of this is also very pleasing to the animals. Therefore, in human society, there are restrictions in the enjoyment of the five sense objects. If one does not follow, he becomes exactly like an animal. Thus, in this verse, it is specifically stated, Kama Kashmal Chetasaha. The consciousness of King Puranjana was polluted by lusty desires and sinful activities. In the previous verse, it is stated that Puranjana, although advanced in consciousness, lay down on a very soft bed with his wife. This indicates that he indulged too much in sensual life. The words Navam Vayaha are also significant in this verse. They indicate the period of youth from age 16 to 30. These 13 or 15 years of life are years in which one can very strongly enjoy the senses. When one comes to this age, he thinks that life will go on and that he will simply continue enjoying his senses. But time and tide wait for no man. The span of youth expires very quickly. One who wastes his life simply by committing sinful activities in youth immediately becomes disappointed and disillusioned when the brief period of youth is over. The material enjoyments of youth are especially pleasing to a person who has no spiritual training. If one is trained only accordingly to the bodily conception of life, he simply leads a disappointed life because bodily sense enjoyment finishes within 40 years or so. After 40 years, one simply leads a disillusioned life because he has no spiritual knowledge. For such a person, the expiration of youth occurs in half a moment. Thus, King Puranjana's pleasure, which he took in lying down with his wife, expired very quickly. Kama Kashmal Chetasaha also indicates that unrestricted sense enjoyment is not allowed in the human form of life by the laws of nature. If one enjoys his senses unrestrictedly, he leads a sinful life. The animals do not violate the laws of nature. For example, the sensual impulse in animals is very strong during certain months of the year. The lion is very powerful. He is a flesh eater and is very strong, but he enjoys sex only once in a year. Similarly, according to religious injunctions, a man is restricted to enjoy sensual life only once in a month after the menstrual period of the wife, and if the wife is pregnant, he is not allowed sensual life at all. That is the law for human beings. A man is allowed to keep more than one wife because he cannot enjoy sex when the wife is pregnant. If he wants to enjoy sensual life at such a time, he may go to another wife who is not pregnant. These are laws mentioned in the Manu Samhita and other scriptures. These laws and scriptures are meant for human beings. As such, if one violates these laws, he becomes sinful. The conclusion is that unrestricted sense enjoyment means sinful activities. Illicit sex is sex that violates the laws given in the scriptures. When one violates the laws of the scriptures or the Vedas, he commits sinful activities. One who is engaged in sinful activities cannot change his consciousness. Our real function is to change our consciousness from Kashmala, sinful consciousness, to Krishna, the supreme pure. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Param Brahma, Param Dhama, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavan. Krishna is the supreme pure, and if we change our consciousness from material enjoyment to Krishna, we become purified. This is the process recommended by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the process of Cheto Darpana Maranyanam, cleansing the mirror of the heart. Hare Krishna.
Yeah. Tathaiva Ramamanasya, very deeply absorbed Ramamana, Kama Kashmala Chetasah. What a word it is. Okay, Kama, because of the sinful reaction, Kashmala, his heart, Chetasah. Okay, Kashmala is sinful, Kama is full of lust, Chetasa is heart. Kshanardamiva Rajendra, Vitikrantam Navambaya. Kshanardam, just like half a moment, entire youth was disappeared. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, Srila Prabhupada quotes Govinda Das Thakur, that how Kamala Dalajala Jivana Talamala. What is the Kamala Dalajala? Ye Dhana Yauvana Putra Parijana. The wealth, Dhana, Yauvana, especially the youthful life, Putra Parijana, Itiki Achepara Tire, Kamala Dalajala. Sometimes we may see on the lotus leaf, a drop of the water, the water will not touch the lotus leaf, and therefore it is always, tankering. I mean, it's always
Floating.
Floating. always floating. Okay, anytime it may just slip off. That's how it is. And this is how Jivana Talamala. This is how the Jivana is, and the happiness in the Jivana is. And therefore, Govinda Das Thakur says, Bhajau Haripada Nitire. And therefore, one should worship the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Srila Prabhupada explains, in the youth, senses are very strong, and one has a very strong tendency, and therefore one just simply let loose all the five senses and want to hear, want to have good form, want to see good form, good taste, smell, touch, and sound. And this is how there is unrestricted enjoyment, such as radio messages. When Prabhupada is writing, it is radio. Now there is TV, more than that, internet, and more than that, there is, now Netflix, and there is unlimited distractions, right? There is OTT and everything else now has come up. So it is like plus, plus, plus. So all this is very pleasing to, but at the same time, this takes one time away. Prabhupada says all this is pleasing even to the animals, right? And if Kama Kashmala Chetasa, the consciousness of the king Puranjan, was polluted by the lusty desire and sinful activities. And therefore Navam Vayam, his youthful age, between 16 to 30, 35, right, was completely gone in sense gratification. And by the time he realized something, he was already in his 40s or 50s, right? And this period of youth is very briefly just slips away from one's hand. And even when one is enjoying sense gratification, if the goal of life is to enjoy sense gratification, how long one can enjoy, right? Prabhupada says just 30, 40 years. And after that, you are just leading a disillusioned life if one has no spiritual knowledge. Therefore, this Kama Kashmara Chetasa, unrestricted sense enjoyment, is not allowed in the human form of life. In fact, in any form of life. Naturally, what happens is animals, they follow the nature's rule. And Srila Prabhupada describes about lion, you know, who is flesh eater, who is extreme in the mode of passion, but he will follow his own, the instinct, and he will not overdo the instinct. And Prabhupada gives, a detailed description that, that he is very strong during certain month in a year. Lion is very powerful, but that doesn't mean that lion is producing cubs all around the year. And, just like you see piglets, or sometimes, you see the snakes producing multiple progeny. That is not the case with the lion. So every form follows their own restriction, and similarly, a restriction is to be followed in the human form of life. And Srila Prabhupada describes similarly, according to Manu Samhita, there are certain restrictive actions between even the human form of life. Now, there are certain frequencies mentioned here, but what is the real frequency? The frequency is the lowest between husband and wife. It is in our counseling, at times this comes up, that one person is absolutely not interested in sense gratification, and another person is much more interested in sense gratification. So what should be the standard of the couple? The standard of the couple is always lowest of the two, right? If one person is not interested and thinking that he's advanced and doing tapasya, and he's become purified, and if the other person who is interested not doesn't satisfies the desires within the limits, and he goes beyond the limits. We are aware that it is, everybody is hearing at home and children around, and we have to maintain the grace in the words. But then what is the use of your so-called control and tapasya, other persons? So the standard is always lowest between the two. Okay. And again, whenever we want to improve, whenever we are getting enlightened, it is always very gradual, age appropriate, and eventually it is. Okay, nothing is like from tomorrow, I am taking sannyas. That kind of markat vairagya will not last. So the laws of nature are meant for the human beings, right? And therefore, Prabhupada says the conclusion is that unrestricted sense enjoyment means sinful activities. Always the case. Unless one becomes sinful, one cannot enjoy in the material world, right? And therefore, a devotee, he will remain. So, what is the whole issue? Whole issue is that soul is anandamayodhyasa. Atma, the nature of Atma is anandamayodhyasa. He is always looking for happiness. Because the Param Bhava Majananto, he doesn't understand the higher happiness of spiritual activities, the art, and because he's always looking for happiness and he doesn't know there is anything spiritual, where he will look for the happiness? The Atma will look for the happiness in the material activities. And the material activities, the more the he looks for the happiness, more and more he becomes implicated, more and more he becomes sinful, and more he becomes caught up in samsara. And therefore, the cure is, Prabhupada says, from Kashmala, one has to comes to Krishna, who is supremely pure. And when param drishtva nivartate, when this higher taste in spiritual life is progressively, eventually, over the decades of practice, okay, nothing to be done immediate, is awakened, then what happens is one's tendency in the sense gratification will be diverted to activities in Krishna consciousness. Later, in the 11th canto, there is a very beautiful verse where Lord is saying to Uddhava, he says, "My dear Uddhava, my devotee understands that the life of sense gratification is a miserable life. And at the same time, because of conditioning, he is unable to give it up and repents for it, still engages in it." We are talking about restricted sense gratification, restricted in the sense within the boundaries. Okay. But still, he is very pleasing to me. I am happy with his struggle. Okay. So, Supreme Lord is very kind. He's happy with our struggles. So, we will conclude here and continue tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Gaurav ki jai. Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you,
Jai.
everyone.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Guruji. Thank you, Guruji.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.